Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm back in Mudy to keep nice and warm. I'm in a very cold room at the moment, and so you got me until it gets too cold to record, but we're all right for the moment. And welcome to Vlogmas 7. You might be wondering what happened to Vlogmas 6 because it's missing. Well, I did record, but I wanted to put a voiceover on top of it, and so I thought this is a really good way to force myself into learning how to edit. So I'm hoping that in the very near future I will have managed to do that, and then I can upload it. And so keep an eye on the channel, and if you see Vlogmas 6, then that'll be why it was late coming up. But yeah, anyway, so we're already at number 7, and I'm using these videos on the run up to Christmas because I thought it's a good way of explaining to you why it is that I don't do Christmas at all in any way, and what happened to take me from loving Christmas through to not having anything to do with it at all. You know, it's quite a few reasons and a lot involved in it, and it's quite a sad, distressing story. So if you're going to tune in the future, be warned that there are some difficult things to hear maybe. So it's just a trigger warning for you. But right now we're still talking about happy memories and happy times. You know, my entire childhood, Christmas was the most wonderful thing. It was a time of joy and celebration, and it was magical. It really was. As a small child, it really was a magical time, and I loved it, you know. And even as I got to be a little bit older but still a child, it was still a wonderful time for many other reasons, you know. Things like it was a time of great feasting, obviously, you know, as it is for every other family. But in our family, we weren't poor. We were never poor. It's not that we didn't have food, but my parents were very small eaters. So the only meal of the year that I would ever feel full at the end of was Christmas dinner. You know, I was never starving. I was never not given a good nutritious diet, but it just wasn't one that you'd feel full. You know, my parents weren't the sort of people who would add bread to a meal. You know, I had friends who used to have bread and butter on the table, and it was like a completely foreign concept to me. And it was always a much smaller meal than is common nowadays, certainly. So it was the time of year when there would be an abundance of food, and you could eat until you were sated, quite literally. But also, on top of that, my parents had both been born in London and grown up in London, but due to the damage to the housing stock during the war, it meant that by the time they were married, there was almost no housing left in London that was affordable to people like my mum and dad. So it meant that if they were going to get a decent house, they would have to then move outside of London. And at that time, the government was building what they termed new towns, sort of satellites around London, which were being built to house the London overspill, you know, because there just wasn't enough housing stock left in London. So it meant that I grew up here in Crawley, but all of our extended family were up in North London, and it wasn't an easily travelable distance in those days. Before my dad learned to drive and got our first car, it meant a train ride, and this will show you how old I am. The very first train ride up to my grandmother's from our town, it was a steam train. It was before diesel trains. It was a steam train. And since then, even that station has gone. it was in town, but they've built a new, more modern station, and now they're talking about building another station, you know, because the modern one is now so old-fashioned. So it was a train up to Victoria Station in London, then we'd have to take the underground across London, and then for a small child it was a really long walk from the underground station to my grandmother's house. So it wasn't a journey that we did often. And also Mum and Dad were working 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, so it wasn't something that we could do as a frequent thing. But at Christmas we would always either visit my dad's side of the family, or we go over and visit my mum's side of the family. She had 2 sisters living in London still. One sister had 5 children, so all my cousins that side. My dad had his brother and his sister. His brother didn't have biological children, but he had 2 adopted children, and his sister had my cousin. So it would be the time that we would go and visit wider family. So that in itself was a lovely part of Christmas. And I've got nothing but good memories of Christmas as I was growing up. The only time where I was a bit disappointed by something, and that's as much as I can say. I wasn't upset, I wasn't traumatised by it, but shall we say just a little bit disappointed, and that was learning the reality of where the presents came from, shall I say, in case young ears are listening. And one night, well, Christmas Eve, I had gone to bed and I was laying there awake, listening really, really hard, so that if anybody were to come in my room, you know, with reindeer outside, I was listening out for reindeer, you know. And eventually the door started opening. Oh, this was it. This was Santa coming in. You know, I was so excited. And I had the covers up round, just peeping over the top of the covers. But it was my mum. And it wasn't just the fact that it was my mum. It was the fact that she was wearing her, as fashionable at the time, it was a blue floral nylon quilted dressing gown. And I remember even at that age as a child thinking, you could have at least put Dad's dressing gown on, because my dad had a kind of velvet dark crimson one. I thought that would have been a bit more realistic. You know, you could have made the effort, Mum. So that's how I found out the reality of where your things came from. So like I say, it wasn't really that much, but it was just that disappointment of not the fact that it was Mum, it was the blue dressing gown. It's so silly. It was just that blue dressing gown that was a disappointment, but not important at all. And then as I carried on growing up, but also still on childhood memories and being little, I thought I would also mention about climate change and how I have memories of different weather going through Christmas. Of course, there is the Christmas of '63, where the snow started on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, and then carried on snowing every day right through till March. I think that year was known as the Big Freeze, possibly in America as well as in the UK, but it was certainly very, very cold. You know, icicles hanging off the gutters, you know, 4-foot long icicles hanging down. My dad used to have to take the sled that he'd built us. He used to take that to the dairy because the milkman couldn't get through on the milk float. So he would take the sled from the dairy and bring a couple of crates of milk back down to our road for us and the neighbours, so that we could carry on having fresh milk. So that's obviously I was very, very young at the time. That was 1963, so I would have been, 5. Yeah, I would have been 5 then. But equally, I have a memory of, it must have been 4 or 5 years after that, of going out for a walk on Christmas Day. It was actually on Christmas Day, in a summer dress without even a cardigan. There was no cardigan, no jumper, no coat. It was warm enough just to go out in a cotton dress and be walking. And what I wanted to say about that is obviously, if you look at sun cycles and solar minimums, you've got an 11-year sun cycle, so the snow would have come at the minimum, and then halfway through the cycle you would have had the maximum, and that's when it would have been warm. And so if you think about your memories of Christmas and how sometimes you get, or even just winter, sometimes you'll have a snowy winter, sometimes it's quite mild. And then if you can actually pinpoint those years and look at where you are in the solar cycle, you can actually see, well, yes, that relates to that year and that relates to that year. Because so much these days we're told about man-made global warming and climate change, and it's all our fault, but actually it isn't. It's all to do with the sun and what's going on in the heavens. You know, the movements of the planets and the cycles of the sun are what create the weather down here on Earth. So it was just something that it had occurred to me that I thought I'll just make a mention of that within these videos, because I think it's interesting to look at it and think about those things. Again, I've made a couple of notes because I know there's bits that I've missed out, and as I say, we're moving forward in time, so I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't completely missing anything out there. So then as I'm sort of growing up, becoming a teenager, getting older, still loving Christmas, and then when I was about 15, I must have been, I went to stay with a boyfriend's family for Christmas, and for the life of me I can't remember if it was because his mum and dad had divorced. I can't remember if it was the mother and the second husband or the father and the second wife, but we'd gone off to stay with them. It was a really beautiful oldie worldy higgledy piggledy country house. You know the kind where you've got to go up a step for one room and down a step for another room. Really, really old, oldie worldy, beautiful house, right out in the countryside. So it was that visit was full of woodland walks and, you know, real lovely festive that time of year activities. And I think we'd just gone down on Boxing Day or the day after, but because his parents were divorced, he was going down to stay with whichever parent he hadn't spent Christmas Day with, and I'd been invited along as well. And I just remember that house because I absolutely loved the house, with the exception of the fact that it had 2 staircases. So it was a reasonable sized house. And the first staircase was absolutely fine. It was an ordinary staircase and you used it to go up and come downstairs. But the second staircase, it just went up. And at the top there was nothing. There wasn't doors, there wasn't like a landing at the top that you sort of corridor that you went down, or doors that led off from there. It literally just went up and stopped. And for some reason I found that really, really creepy, and, you know, it unsettled me, the fact that there was this staircase that didn't go anywhere. I don't even know why I'm telling you that. It was just bizarre. But it was part of my Christmas memories of those years. And then if I was 15, I must have been 14, 15 about then. But of course, you know, my parents had spoken to his parents, and it was all very above board, and, you know, we weren't in the same room or anything like that. But so if I was 15, then it would have been the following year that I was, by that time I was engaged to Robert. And so from then on, our Christmases would be normally at my mum's house. You know, there was a time early on when we had a discussion about mum, and I said something about, or he said something about mum, and I said my mum or your mum, and he just said to me, our mum. That was my mum. He had his mum and our mum. But there was one particular Christmas, and I'm pretty sure it's when we were engaged, before we were married, when he was due to come to us for Christmas dinner. And by this time his mum and dad had moved to a house about 20-minute drive away. But he'd got up to come over to us on Christmas morning and found out that he had no petrol in his car. You know, typical man, you know, run petrol to the bottom of the tank, run it on fumes. But the reason that I'm mentioning this is because in those days, you could not find a garage open on Christmas Day to get petrol. There was no way that he could go and get petrol anywhere in order to fill his car and come over. With the benefit of hindsight, we often used to use his dad's car or his mum's car, so I have no idea why he didn't borrow one of their cars to come over. But instead of that, it meant that he had to siphon fuel out of one of their cars in order to put fuel in his car to drive over to us, which meant that, I mean, if you know about siphoning fuel, you get a hose and you've got to suck it, and he got a mouthful of petrol, which meant that it completely destroyed the flavour of his Christmas dinner. But it was just odd thinking that, you know, even not that far ago, you couldn't buy things on Christmas Day. You know, everything was shut. It didn't matter what it was closed. You know, nowadays we're so used to everything being 24 hours and you can get whatever you need at any time of the day or night, any day of the year. But back in those days, you had to prepare in advance. And from teenagers onwards, really, you know, at the time when I'd started buying presents for other people out of my money, on to when I was organising Christmas for myself, I've always had a slight sense of relief when the shops close on Christmas Eve, because by that time, you know, all the last minute frantic trying to get things, it doesn't matter whether you've got it or not, it's over. If you've got it, great. If you haven't got it, you go without. And there was always that sense of, phew, that's the end of the shopping. That's all over and done with. So, like I say, by the time I'm 16, I'm engaged. By the time I'm 7, well, I got married at 17. So that Christmas, we would have had it in our flat. And I remember that we bought the most enormous Christmas tree that you've ever seen, that even when we moved out of the flat 2 years later, there were still needles on the floor from the tree because I don't know if I hadn't watered it enough or if I'd not got rid of it soon enough, but it had dropped needles. And it's not like trees nowadays that they do something to them so they don't drop. But in those days, if you had a real Christmas tree, you would have needles to deal with. So even when we moved out of the flat, I still had to hoover up needles from that. And then our children started coming along and it was back to being magical again. You know, I think having a child at Christmas is a joy in itself, because you experience it through their eyes and their experiences. And so that was just a wonderful thing, you know, as my children came along and started to become aware of the Christmas stories and things. You know, it was such a joy. But unfortunately, very early on, you know, my youngest wasn't even 3 when we had to separate, and that meant that I'm now a single parent. Although that first Christmas after we separated, I didn't want to go down that whole road of, are you having the children, am I having the children, or are they going to have them half day here and half day there, one day here, one day there? I said, no, you come to us and we'll spend Christmas as a family, which is what we did. And I think we did that for the first few years, because there was no animosity. You know, we were still very, very close. And I will go into the whole story of why we had to separate. But for the purpose of this vlog, suffice it to say that as far as I was concerned, I was married right up to the point where he died. And I was actually there holding his hand when he died. But back to happier times, you know, and Christmas was wonderful. The children were really enjoying it. And as a single parent, as they were growing up, I was determined to make it so that, especially because of the whole mythology around Father Christmas, whatever their friends were going to get from Father Christmas, they would have something at least of equal value. I didn't want them to feel that they were treated less than because they didn't have a dad at home. And I know different people tell children different things about how presents, you know, I had one friend who used to tell her children that she had to pay Father Christmas for the toys and things that they got, and I just wanted to make sure that my children felt as good as everybody else's children, and there wasn't any sort of feeling of being less than because they were in a single parent family. And you know, so as they were growing up, it was a joy. I used to love, absolutely adore Christmas morning, not just because of my children, but I'd wake up and my bedroom is at the front of the house, and I'd be woken up to the sound of children riding their brand new bikes outside my window. And you know, if they had bikes or roller skates or scooters or anything that they needed to go out of the house with, I would hear the sound of that outside the window. And you know, I mean, that was as much of a joy to me watching those children as it was seeing my own children open their presents and enjoy their Christmas. And Christmas to me was a time when you would share everything that you had. And so I would do Christmas, and I would, because I was at home during, my mum and dad were both working, my sister was working, everybody else was working full time, so I was at home bringing up my family, so I had the time to prepare and organise Christmas for everybody else. So everyone would come to my house for Christmas, and I would do a great big Christmas dinner, and everyone was welcome at my Christmas table, you know, friends, family, whoever. If I heard of anybody who weren't invited somewhere else, then it would be, well, come to us then, come and have Christmas with us. And so it was always a house full of people, lots of laughter, and it actually got to the stage where it was a case of, come to Christmas dinner, but you must bring a chair, because I didn't have enough dining. I would borrow big folding tables from the church up the road. So I had enough table space, but I didn't have enough chairs for people to sit on. So bring a chair, bring a plate, because I didn't have enough plates to go around. Bring your own cutlery, because I didn't have enough cutlery to go around. I think the only thing I had enough of were glasses. And you know, we would have Christmas crackers over the meal. I don't know if you have those in other countries, but you know, Christmas crackers was always an integral part of the Christmas dinner for me growing up and bringing my children up. And Christmas dinner was such an important meal, you know. I have never, ever, ever liked turkey, but it wasn't Christmas if you didn't have turkey on the table. You know, you'd have a big turkey. You'd cook it with bacon over the breast, so you would have like crispy bacon. There would be chipolata sausages around the turkey. There'd be roast potatoes, roast parsnips, stuffing, bread sauce, sprouts. Of course, there had to be sprouts. There'd be carrots and peas and any parsnips, any amount of vegetables. You know, there'd be just crammed, heaped up plates. And then there would be Christmas pudding, you know, traditional Christmas pudding, which when my kids were little, I would actually do homemade Christmas pudding with the sixpence in it, because it's traditional in the UK to have a sixpence in the Christmas pudding, and somebody would be lucky and find it, or they'd be very unlucky and break a tooth on it. But you would have that in the Christmas pudding. Or there would be trifle for people who didn't like Christmas pudding, or mince pies and cream. You know, there was all this traditional food that you'd have. You'd always make sure there were loads of sausage rolls cooked for Christmas. There'd be mince pies. You'd have your tin of Quality Street. It was always a time of what I used to think of at the time as feasting. When I look back on it, I think gluttony, really. You know, there's no other word to describe it. But, you know, Christmas was a big, big thing, and I loved it. And I enjoyed hosting it, and I loved having people come to me for Christmas. So I'll call that there for that part of the story. And we've got on to the next bit tomorrow. So stay tuned. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell so that you'll be notified when the next parts upload. All right, take care, and I hope that you're getting your Christmas shopping done, and you're looking forward to Christmas this year. Because just because I don't do it doesn't mean to say that everybody else shouldn't. You know, I'd be upset if other people didn't. Okay, so lots of love. Bye.